Okay, now it says webinar has started.
Right. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's session, Knowledge is Power, HBCU Research, Narrative Control, and Policy Decision Making. This conversation sits at the very heart of why we are convened, to examine how research not only informs policy, but shapes the narrative that define institutions, communities, and ultimately democracy itself. At HBCUs, research has always been more than an academic exercise. It has been a tool of agency. It has challenged deficit-based narratives, elevated evidence-based truth, and positioned HBCUs as essential contributors to national discourse on education, equity, and opportunity. Today's session invites us to think critically about who produces knowledge, whose knowledge is valued, and how that knowledge is mobilized to influence policy and practice. We are especially honored to be joined by a scholar whose work exemplifies the power of research to shift both narrative and policy, Ivory Toldson. Dr. Toldson is a nationally recognized expert on education, workforce development, and the outcomes of historically marginalized populations, particularly African Americans. He currently serves as professor of counseling psychology at Howard University and is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education, one of the most influential scholarly publications dedicated to the study of Black education. Dr. Tolson's career spans scholarship, policy, and public service at the highest levels. He previously served as executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs under President Barack Obama, where he played a pivotal role in advancing federal policy priorities to strengthen HBCUs. He has also held leadership roles within the U.S. Department of Education and has advised policymakers, institutions, and organizations across the country. As a scholar, Dr. Tolson's research has been instrumental in challenging pervasive myths about Black student achievement and success. His work consistently centers data-driven, strength-based narratives that highlight resilience, excellence, and the structural conditions that shape educational outcomes. Through books, peer-reviewed publications, and national media, Dr. Toldson has helped reframe how we understand Black students, HBCUs, and the broader educational landscape. Importantly, Dr. Toldson stands at the intersection of research and action. He reminds us that data is not neutral, it is a form of power. And when wielded intentionally, it can transform policy, disrupt inequities, and reposition institutions like HBCUs as architects, not objects, of educational reform. Today, we will explore HBC research, how HBC research can be leveraged to assert narrative control, inform high impact policy decisions, and strengthen the collective voice of HBCUs in shaping the future of higher education. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed scholar and my colleague, Dr. Ivory Toldson.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Carter, for the very warm introduction. And I want to thank everyone who's participating in this dialogue. It's a very important discussion, and it really speaks to what HBCU's role is in the larger enterprise of higher education, particularly how it relates to our research. So I'm going to begin by showing a teaser trailer that I made for this workshop. I actually posted it yesterday on LinkedIn. Right, let me make sure I'm also sharing my sound. Okay. Okay, and if you don't hear any volume, ping me so I can fix it.
For decades, a pyramid has loomed over American higher education, a hierarchy that ranks institutions not by the depth of their impact, but by the volume of their funding. But one scholar, a professor at Howard University and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education, has been asking a different question. What if the pyramid is upside down? Bad statistics aren't just wrong, they're weapons. And for too long, they've been aimed at the institutions that produce the most consequential research for Black communities. In Chapter 12 of Possibility and Statistics, Dr. Toldson dismantles the Carnegie classification pyramid, exposing how Research One metrics were never designed to measure what HBCUs do best: R1 institutions measure output. HBCUs measure transformation. The most powerful research doesn't just fill journals. It fills courtrooms, legislative chambers, and community centers. Knowledge isn't power when it's locked behind a paywall. Knowledge is power when it changes a policy, corrects a narrative, and liberates a people. We don't need to climb the pyramid. We need to dismantle it and build a framework where research is measured by its power to liberate, not its power to exclude. This is the thesis of Chapter 12. This is the mission of the HBCU Center Research Network. What happens when we lead the policy conversation? The HBCU Center Research Network 2026 Virtual Conference presents Evidence, Power, and Democracy, featuring Dr. Ivory A. Toldson and Dr. Melanie Carter. They built the pyramid to rank us. We brought the research to replace it. The revolution won't be ranked, it will be researched. Register now. Dismantle the Pyramid. HCRN 2026, April 22nd through the 23rd.
Okay. So I want to acknowledge that Howard. Oh, you want to say something, Dr. Carter? That's why you took yourself off mute.
Oh, just wow. Wow. That's all I can say. All right. Continue, Dr. Toldson.
Okay, so I want to acknowledge that Howard is an R1 institution as of recently, and I want to talk a bit about my journey as a career-long researcher at HBCUs, someone who got Young Researcher of the Year at another HBCU, Southern University, and then came to Howard and saw our transition into a Research One institution, and talk about what that means and how we got there and how we can be leaders in this space, not to be there to be the same as other R1 institutions, but to redefine what it means to be R1 and redefine what research excellence really means. So I'm going to start my slideshow at this point. Okay, can everyone see my slides? All right, so back to my journey. I started my career at Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This was right after I finished my pre-doctoral internship at the United States Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. At the penitentiary, I worked as a prison psychologist, where I provided counseling and did uh, evaluations of inmates. And as many of you all know, the criminal justice system in the United States, our inmate population is disproportionately Black, about 45% Black, compared to our 13% representation in the U.S. population. So being there took a little bit of emotional strength. It wasn't just a task of cognitively doing what I needed to do, but I also had to emotionally sit with the fact that there were so many people who look like me who was in the criminal justice system, and then look at the policies and the racism embedded within our system that contributed to that. But in the midst of all of that, I knew that if I wanted to survive in the academy, there was a certain way I needed to position my research in order to gain acceptability. So when I got to Southern University, I prepared the manuscript based on my dissertation research on Black men in the criminal justice system, as many people do. Once they get their PhD, a lot of times their first manuscript is carved out of their dissertation. And I tried to follow all the rules of the academy as I understood them. I tried to make sure that it was as objective as it could possibly be, and to follow a methodological pattern, cadence, and tone that would gain acceptability. But when I submitted it out to the peer review journal, the top tier peer review journal, it was rejected. And being a journal editor myself, I understand that rejection is a part of the game, but there was one line in the rejection letter that always sat with me. And that line was that they found my manuscript to be needlessly contentious and emotionally loaded. So those words carry a punch to them, a punch in my gut that made me really reflect on, what did I say that was so contentious, and how is it that what I what I deliberately tried to position as something very neutral still came off as emotionally loaded to whoever looked at it, to this gatekeeper that looked at it. And then, what does it mean for me to not show any emotions when it's a topic that I care so much about? If I'm looking at all of these young Black men in the criminal justice system, Black men who look just like myself, even as I saw a lot of white men in the criminal justice system that looked and appeared nothing like my white colleagues. Um, for me to not have any emotion in a situation like that seems a bit like research malpractice, not good practice. So as I try to reconcile that and think of ways to try to express the things I was feeling about the subject matter that was important to me. I started to take some liberties in the research that I was doing, and I found being at an HBCU allowed me that flexibility. I wrote a novel called Black Sheep, When the American Dream Becomes a Black Man's Nightmare. That was the first book that I wrote I published it in 2004 before I came to Howard University. But that novel helped me to encapsulate a lot of the things that I was feeling about my research on Black men. Then at the same time, I was also starting to learn how to write and conduct research in a way that would gain some acceptability. But I have to admit that as I wrote more in the style and way that the field wanted me to write, I found my research to be a little less relevant and a little less meaningful to myself. So I, tr- I left I left Southern University and went to Howard University around 2005. Continued my academic journey at Howard University and began to work in policy. I published the Breaking Barriers series for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. I went from doing mostly criminal justice related work to education. Also did some work with substance abuse. So I started to do a lot of different, delve into a lot of different pathways of research. And then I also availed myself of different opportunities to learn from some of the larger Research One universities. I took some classes at University of Michigan, where I learned how to analyze large databases. I spent a summer at Emory University, where I worked in a rat lab, looking at substance abuse. All of these are very meaningful experiences and really helped my trajectory. I also spent some time at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and this isn't to take away from any of those experiences. Again, these are very meaningful experiences, but there was one experience I had that was very telling when I was at Chapel Hill when they assign a senior mentor to all of the junior scholars from these historically disadvantaged institutions, HBCUs, tribal colleges, and community colleges, some of the non-R1 institutions. And so there was a woman, and this was only about a year away from me becoming tenure at Howard University. I was assistant professor at the time, and this was designed for junior faculty for us to learn how to up our game and to go towards tenure. And so I was paired with this older woman, and she was a senior stateswoman at the institution. She prided herself on really ushering and shepherding young faculty members through the process of tenure. And I remember her reviewing my resume, and the first thing she told me was, she said, "You're in big trouble, young man." And I was, wondering why. I had done all of these things. I had done things in education, done things in criminal justice, done things for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, published in a variety of different mediums. Um, but she saw all of that as a weakness and not a strength. And she said that she has seen this play out time and time again. She referred to me as a young, maybe a bit charismatic faculty who was engaged in all of this community work. And she said that the university will use that to their advantage, but they will never award me with tenure. And so, anytime I'm out there in the community, the university may highlight that and spotlight it because it's good for them at that time. But she said it's not good for the university in the long run. And so her suggestion to me was to narrow down to one specific area of research and to only focus on the publications and the grants and leave everything else behind. And the thing that popped in my mind when she said that was, thank God I teach at an HBCU. Because what she was saying probably would be sage advice if I was a junior scholar at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But at a university like Howard University, they valued this broad contribution. When I wrote the Breaking Barriers report, which was peer review, but it was peer review on my own terms. And I wrote it in collaboration with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and we released it on the Hill. And the dean of the School of Education at the time, Dean Leslie Fenwick, was there to support that release. And it made it all the way up to the president's office at Howard University that I wrote this report. These are things that they valued at Howard University, but at UNC Chapel Hill, based on this woman's advice, not so much. So my research was all over the place, as she said, but not because of a lack of focus. It's because of the lived realities of Black people are all over the place. And so for us to isolate into one specific thing, as we see a lot of our colleagues do at the larger Research One institutions, would be to deny very important aspects of who we are. So most of our HBCUs are embedded within the community. I'm at my office at Howard University right now, the minor building, which sits on Georgia Avenue, which is a vibrant community, storefront shops and barber shops and churches. And, this is where a lot of our research is born from. And we get to feel that urgency because this is where we are. So when we think about this pyramid system that we have, where we kind of have this unspoken rule that those at the top of this pyramid are the large Carnegie classified R1 institutions, we are setting up a system where we're privileging output over impact. And so we're privileging things like how much grants have you gotten, how much scholarship have you produced in these specific domains, and we're ignoring the demands that our communities have. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is, by participating in a system like this without questioning it, do we lose anything important in the soul of HBCUs, but more important, are we denying an important contribution that we can have to impact communities that haven't been served that well by some of the institutions that seem to get a lot of the attention and the prestige? So this gets to the pressures that we are under. So in institutional theory, there are these isomorphic pressures that can constrain an institution and that shapes how institutions behave. And so you have coercive pressures and what's called mimetic pressures and normative pressures. And all of these, if I were to put all these in a nutshell, it is the tendency for institutions to have different institutions that are seen as models, and for every other institution to strive to be more like the institution seen as a model in order to be great themselves. So, under these isomorphic pressures, a school like Howard University might look towards a school like Harvard because of the prestige that Harvard has gotten. And so we might look at our metrics and look at the proximity of those metrics to Harvard to judge whether or not we are doing as well as we think we should be doing. Now, what's the problem with that? Um, Howard Howard has about a 64% Pell eligibility. So that means that the majority of the students at Howard University would be considered lower income by the U.S. Department of Education. And Howard actually has the lowest Pell eligibility of all HBCUs. So imagine that. So we have the majority are Pell eligible, but we are the lowest among all HBCUs, whereas the HBCU average is around somewhere between 74 and 78%. Harvard's Pell eligibility is about 13%. So if we were to try to model what schools like Harvard has achieved, we might start to um, deny opportunities to lower income students and focus more of our efforts on our alumni who have done well and tried to get more of their kids or tried to more heavily recruit from some of the so-called elite private high schools instead of getting a lot of public school students. So we'd be doing things like that because we're trying to emulate a certain success that may not be a success that helps us to be who we are. So when we think about how we should be positioning ourselves, because we should acknowledge that we will never be a better predominantly white institution than a predominantly white institution. So we have to be the best HBCU that we could possibly be. And I think about anecdote from a docuseries on Pablo Picasso when I think about HBCU scholarship. So Pablo Picasso was, before he became famous as a prominent and some would call a revolutionary abstract artist, he was trained in the style of classical European art. This is an art form that painted in a way that was true to life. You could barely tell a difference between what they were painting and the photograph. And that was the most prominent art at the time. And so he was trained in that style, but he wasn't moved by it. And he knew something was missing. And he became enamored with the artwork of an artist named Matisse. Matisse had this radical way of positioning his art on the canvas that didn't rely on the technical detail of or the similarity to the subject, but distortions and contortions and exaggerations of features. And he was so enamored with Maltese's work that one time they were at a festival together, and they were at the same festival, and Picasso was showing his work, and Matisse put up his work, and Picasso was, so enamored with Matisse and felt so bad about the lack of depth of his own work that he packed up his stuff and left. He refused to show his work next to Matisse's. And one of Picasso's friends tried to cheer him up by showing him this article where the writer was slamming Matisse's work, calling it primitive and uh, uh, just all of these different things. And Picasso's response was, I want people like that to say stuff like this about my work. And so after a while, Picasso ended up meeting Matisse. And Matisse was very open with Picasso. And the first thing he did was gave him an African mask. And Matisse said, look at the features of this mask. Look at how they represent the eyes and the nose and the facial structure. And he said, Africans aren't painting our lives, they're painting our dreams, where European artists are only doing what photographers can now do best. And so with that, Picasso switched up his style, um, uh, adapted, some may even say co-opted, but he started to incorporate African art into these European styles, and that's what brought us the Picasso that made him a revolutionary artist. So when I think about the types of research that HBCUs can possibly do, I think about the African artists that inspired Picasso's work. Um, the inventiveness, the community engagement, the impact, and focus on impact rather than output. All of these are things that can naturally show through research that isn't done in a clean and sterile lab and isn't done in a place that is isolated from the communities. That's not done in a pristine college town, but it's done in the community. And so, how do we define what we do? How do we find new ways of understanding what excellence is? So when we think about some of the core differences of what we do or what we have the potential to do and what they're already doing. So when we think about the core structure of this, right now it's about hierarchy, it's about competition, and it's about scarcity. But what if instead of hierarchy, we look at more of an ecosystem? So instead of the pyramid, think of it as a constellation. We could think of these R1 institutions as a supernova, but we also have all of these other stars in the constellation that is as essential to the entire ecosystem as this star that's just shining brighter. Whether we think of it in terms of collaboration as opposed to competition, and whether we think about it in terms of abundance as opposed to scarcity. And then in terms of definition of excellence, um, as the woman from UNC Chapel Hill said, their definition of excellence is doing one narrow thing very good and getting grant dollars and getting in elite journals. How would we define the opposite of that? Well, it would be something more pluralistic. So instead of measuring excellence based on this one singular thing that you're known for, what if your excellence is based on the plurality of what you do, the ability to be interdisciplinary and to cut across different things? And what if it's not measured just by these two narrow things, but measured by the institution's contribution to the whole? In terms of our asset, being detached and objective analysis, that is seen as a primary asset of a lot of the R1 institutions that exist. But what if we own our asset as our proximity, not our attachment, our detachment, but our proximity and our integration of diverse ways of knowing, as opposed to just this objective analysis. Whether the role of the researcher is an engaged person, whether if we define that as excellence as opposed to a detached specialist, and whether the role of the community in our way of defining excellence is being a co-creator of knowledge, a partner in inquiry, as opposed to just a subject of study or a site for data extraction. And how might this look like? Is there a way to quantify this? So in my book, which comes out next month or month after next in June, again, and this all comes from chapter 12 of a book that I have coming out called Possibility and Statistics. So in it, I introduced the community resonance quotient. So the community resonance quotient is a way to understand the value of a publication, not just based on how many of your peers have cited it, but how well does it resonate with the community that you co-created that research with. And so there's a metric that we can use to have alternative way of understanding that impact. And then another metric that I introduced is epistemological diversity index. So what if we looked at a manuscript or a study and looked at the diversity of the ways in which knowledge was created, and that could be a value point to how we measure whether or not it has this impact or doesn't have this impact. So it's about creating systems that work for us. Anytime we're in a position or a posture where someone outside of us are creating the systems that we're judged by, we're always going to be at somewhat of a disadvantage. So finding ways in order to look at the way that communities engage in our work and how it impacts our community is very important. I would say in my own research, when I did the Breaking Barriers reports for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, these reports were the first time I had the kind of research that I thought truly represented what HBCU research could be. And this is before I actually had any kind of title for it. But a lot of the writings that I did since then, both the No BS Bad Stats, which critiqued some of the ways in which people were using data prior to me writing and subsequent to me writing those reports. But possibility and statistics really look at the style of the research and the impact of the research, and tries to define what it means to do research in that way, and how HBCUs can be the owners of that. So being in the constellation is a way for us to really understand what our role is and be able to set ourselves apart from what we are shown as these models. Another example of work that I think fits into this, the style of work is the work that I've done with Concentric, where if we look at chronic absenteeism, a lot of the reports that we see are detached. They look at numbers from a distance and then they define the problem from a distance. The work I did with Concentric involved people actually going, knocking on doors, sitting down with people on at their kitchen tables or on their doorsteps, and trying to figure out why these kids are absent, and then to shift the focus from punishing families to fix their behavior, to finding solutions to help them to do better. So I want to close with this, because we have to really think about the types of institutions that we want to be. And I remember there was a panel discussion that I was a part of, where there were a group of university recruiters there, and they wanted to understand better mechanisms for attracting faculty members of color. And so they asked me, what would I consider to be some of the best strategies for recruiting faculty members of color. And my question to them was, what kind of faculty members of color do you want? And so they seemed kind of miffed by that question. And I guess they thought the answer would be obvious. They wanted the good kind. But when you when they had to really think about, do you want, and this is how I explained it to them, do you want a faculty member of color that is indistinguishable from the faculty members that you have on their background, their perspective, their style of research, their ways of engaging students, um, indistinguishable from everybody else other than the fact that they have pigment to their skin? Or do you want someone to come in and really challenge the current system, the status quo, to approach research, their scholarship, their perspective, their ways of engaging students, their ways of engaging the community in a completely different way, that helps you all to think about new ways of positioning your work? Is that the kind of faculty member of color that you want? And it was hard for them to co-sign on that. But as HBCUs, we have to think about what kind of HBCUs do we want to be? Do we want to be an HBCU that is as similar to the predominantly white institutions that seem to get the most attention? Do we see our proximity to their success as our best asset, or do we see our innovation and our way of transforming the way knowledge is produced, the way that research is functions, the purpose of research, how we define excellence? Is that the kind of HBCU that we want to be? So with that, I will conclude, and I hope I left a little bit of time for Q&A and discussion.
So first of all, I have about 10,000 questions myself, but I won't ask those. But certainly a powerful presentation, Dr. Toldson. And let me say that, I think you answered many of the questions that we have in this conference in terms of how we look at knowledge and data and so forth. So I really, really want to applaud you on the presentation. The other thing I want to do is certainly illuminate your upcoming release, because clearly we want to make sure that we certainly read it and use it and all the ways that are going to be so important. So I was just really, really drawn in terms of what you said and what you presented. I have an overarching question before I go to the questions from the audience. In terms of thinking about when you ask the recruiters in terms of what kind of faculty members what kind of Black faculty members they want, I think that's a very powerful question. I'm also wondering what you think that means as we're preparing researchers and scholars in our academic programs. How do we nurture and support the development of scholars who are not just trying to replicate, but are being revolutionary in a sense, or not sort of attracted to this sort of proximity to whatever it is these other institutions seem to have, instead of sort of seeing some other innovative way of thinking about research that's more grounded in who we are as institutions and who perhaps we are as Black scholars.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I see people grappling with, departments grappling with this all the time without really naming it. So I think that a lot of us, and I think we do this in error, but when we think about what faculty members should be promoted, a lot of us do think about their publications in top-tier peer-reviewed journals. And so if you have one faculty member who published in whatever is the top journal, has this huge impact factor, and that only accepts about 5% of the manuscripts that are submitted to them, we see that faculty member as being more valuable to us than a faculty member who published in a community bulletin. I think we go into it with that. I think we have to challenge that, and we have to really think about what might be lost when we do it that way. What type of faculty member published in the top tier peer review journal and what type of faculty member published in the bulletin. So we have to look at we have to look at them overall. And so if the faculty member who published in a top tier peer review journal is someone who is completely disconnected from students, who finds any any way to avoid any kind of meaningful contribution to the institution and is locked and loaded into spreadsheets all the time, and they care more about the field and their peers than they do about the institution. But the one that published in that bulletin is out there, is active, is speaking, is engaged, is really representing the institution. I think we have to look at that total package, and we have to really name what we're doing. Now, because of these pressures, and I'm not naive to that. There is some of those things that we have to do, but we have to make sure we're not sacrificing one thing in order to achieve that. And we have to make sure that we aren't treating people unfairly based on indicators that someone else gave us. You may have someone that published a bulletin and we see there's a pattern of just always wanting to take an easy route. And that was the easiest route for them, and that's the only reason they did that. But you'll also see some people that just really wanted to get their information to the people that they thought it could help. And so that's what we have to be more discerning about that. And going back to the models that I've created for my book, I think that we have what I want my book to do is to give people a formal peer review way of measuring what that impact is, so that you can make a cogent argument for styles of publication and research dissemination that may not fit into the system that we've been given or that's been pushed on us.
I think that's so important. You're right, just to have some definitive or a source that says, listen, there are no other ways of thinking about this or doing this, and there's a academically sanctioned process to go about doing that. So I certainly agree with that. Some of these topics in a very not as an elevated way as you shared today, came up in our session yesterday in the sister circle when we talked about this issue of R1 institutions and HBCUs, and this issue of whether or not these models served us well. And so much of what you said really did was a sort of a great way to sort of think even more deeply about some of the things that were shared in our session on yesterday. I'm wondering too, as editor of the journal Negro Education, which is certainly a critically important publication venue for all scholars, but certainly scholars who are studying issues about related to Black education. I'm just wondering, in terms of that process, in terms of how you select reviewers, or how you make decisions about publishing, how these issues or these questions that you raised or ones that you raised come in, influence or shape that process.
Yeah, and that's certainly something that I've had to think critically about as journal editor, and all of the isomorphic pressures that I talked about HBCUs facing when trying to raise up the ranks. A journal like the Journal of Negro Education have those same pressures. So there is a style of research that is considered an industry standard. And if we deviate too far away from that, we have to wonder whether or not we will be considered credible.
Yes.
But the most important thing is to define what success is on our own terms. There are aspects of research that I think are very important. Being able to minimize your threats to internal and external validity. I don't think that that compromises in internal and external validity I don't think that that's a myth or something that is just pushed on us by white science. I think that it hits to the heart of whether or not we're saying whether or not what we're saying is true to what we did, and whether or not it can generalize appropriately. So all of those methods that we learn are important tools for us to bring into this. But I also understand that there are some studies that look very rigorous in terms of their methodology and their statistical analysis, but they aren't saying anything important about who we are. And so, that's where I'll have to depart from some of our peer journals that doesn't focus on our population. We can't put methods and we can't put statistical analysis over the substance of what they're saying. A lot of the BS, the bad stats that I critiqued, have come from a lot of these more reputable journals, and it's a style that's disconnected. Things like strong positionality statements are other things that we have to look for. We also have to make sure we're working with authors appropriately if we know that the heart is in their work. And so instead of just slamming an author because their methods was off, if they're writing something that's important, being more willing to work with them than someone who is writing something that is deficit oriented, even if the method is good. If it's something that could be harmful, then we have to make sure that we make the right decisions in terms of whether or not we're going to consider that work. Oh, you muted.
Thanks, Ivory. Sorry about that, Dr. Toldson. A question is, what advice would you give to beginning researchers at HBCUs in terms of how to shape their publication trajectory and what they should be doing early on to make sure that they are successful, not only as a faculty member, in teaching, but also in scholarship?
Mhm. Yeah, so and this isn't, just a cheap plug, but get my book Possibility and Statistics. You're the type of person I wrote it for, because you need to be active in scholarship. You need to be able to argue for the validity of what you do. You need to carve out a path that will position you to make an impact with your research, not just hit off check marks. I've seen too many young faculty members get discouraged and not be fulfilled by their research because it's being twisted into something that they didn't want. That's what happened with me when I was trying to do research on Black men in the criminal justice system. Um, but what I didn't understand was that, and this is something that it took me, maybe a decade to figure out, that I didn't have to completely compromise the integrity of my work in order to make a difference. But there wasn't a whole lot of things for me to cite in terms of the method of what I was doing. So I want scholars of conscience to have a method, to be able to cite a source that where they could let their institutions know, these are the ways in which I am positioning my research, and this is why I think it's valuable. Um, so I would just encourage you to look at some of the paradigms in that book. Think about the impact that you want to make, not just the publications that you want to publish in. A lot of times there's a convergence in that, but sometimes there's a divergence, and you have to, make sure you know which is which. Um, be an active scholar, and just try to think creatively and innovatively about how you're doing your research. There's an art and a science to research, and so make sure you don't ignore the art.
I love that response. Well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Toldson. This has been an amazing, amazing session. As I knew it would, I always say that I tell people I can always depend on Dr. Toldson to say everything that needs to be said. Okay. And you certainly did that today. And so, again, we want to thank you so much for being a part of the conference and being a great supporter of the HBCU Center. You truly, truly are. You're on our advisory board and just really a great colleague and friend of the center. So thank you so much. And
Thank
again,
you.
thanks everyone for joining us. And we invite you to join our next session in about 2 minutes. All right. Thanks so much, Dr. Toldson. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, thank you again. Great. And I think we all should adopt this textbook in all the research courses. I said, I can't take a picture of that screen, okay? But that's what I wanted to do. I really like that. How you made sure for the validity around is the narrative being repeated. I mean, there were that whole slide around basically a way of validation, and I thought it was amazing. I loved it. So I can't wait. I can't wait. And we're going to have you on Turning Pages. We want to highlight your book on our Turning Pages podcast, if that's okay.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Looking forward to it. All right, thanks again.
Okay.
Talk to you soon. And I'm sorry about my light going out. Did your light go out like that on your office?
No, it hasn't.
See, my light dims so that's why I go dark. And then someone has to go, hey, I didn't want to do all that to turn it back on, but that's what happens. Okay. Bye.
All right.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.